Okay, now that we've covered the interwar period and the Great Depression, now let's look at the causes of World War II. Why did it begin? How did it begin? How did the world let ourselves get to the worst war since the last World War, and that was supposedly the worst war that the world had ever seen? So if you look at the major players of World War II, you have the US, Great Britain, and the USSR, or Russia, on one side, and Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Italy on the other side. So here are your major players, the rise of the dictators. During the 1920s and the 1930s, totalitarian dictators came to power in many different nations. Remember, a totalitarian government is one that exerts total control over the nation and the citizens' lives. In Japan, you have Emperor Hirohito, so that's kind of like the king, and the Prime Minister Hideki Tojo. And they believed in a very militaristic government where they used their military to get power and more land. Italy believed in fascism. They had the leader Benito Mussolini. He was Il Duce. He believed in single ruler taking over the country and a strong belief in nationalism, national pride. Germany, you have Adolf Hitler. He believed in Nazism. Nazism, if you remember, is Germany's brand of fascism. So it's a very, very strong focus on German ideals and German history. In the Soviet Union, you've got Joseph Stalin. He believed in communism, which was an economic policy where everybody shared their economic gains and wealth. And he believed in that political philosophy as well. So there wasn't really big business, it was government-owned big business. Economic and political causes of the war. The Treaty of Versailles failed. It wasn't realistic. It was a good idea, but unrealistic to be followed in the world. The League of Nations was very weak. The United States never joined it, and it kind of fell apart once that happened. It had no real power to back up things that it wanted to do. So it could say, Germany, no, don't do that. But there was no power to absolutely back it up. So Germany was like, psh, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to pay attention. You've also got aggression by the totalitarian powers, which were Germany, Italy, and Japan. They kept doing and taking what they wanted without any punishment. So they just kept taking more. Appeasement, which is giving in to Hitler. Basically, people didn't want to get into another world war, so they were like, okay, Hitler, we'll give you what you want for right now, just don't keep doing it. But he kept doing it. And then there were a lot of tendencies towards isolationism and pacifism in Europe and the US. We don't want to get involved in other people's business. We just want to kind of stick to ourselves, recover from this Great Depression. We don't want to deal with any of these problems. Major leaders of the war. Franklin Roosevelt was the U.S. president during this time. Harry Truman became the U.S. president after the death of President Roosevelt in 1945. Dwight Eisenhower was a U.S. general who was highly involved in the European front during this time. Douglas MacArthur was another U.S. general that was very involved in the war. George Marshall, again, was another major U.S. general during the war. The war begins. The democracies realized that appeasement had failed, so giving Hitler what he wanted kept failing for us. So they promised to protect Poland, which was most likely Hitler's next target. So Hitler formed a Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact with Stalin. So basically they said, we're not going to fight each other, it'll be okay, we're just going to leave each other alone. Then the German forces invaded Poland. The Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, while Germany did it from the west. Britain and France immediately declared war on Germany then. War in Europe. During the first 2 years of the war, the U.S. stayed officially neutral as Germany overran France, most of Europe and pounded Britain from the air, known as the Battle of Britain. Basically, they kept dropping bombs at all times. It pretty much sucked really, really bad. In mid-1941, Hitler then turned on the Soviet Union and invaded. So he broke that non-aggression pact and went into the Soviet Union. Which, how he did not learn from Napoleon's errors in invading Russia, we have no idea. The Battle of Britain. So in 1940, Hitler ordered the invasion of Britain. The Germans decided to first bomb military targets, then it changed tactics to the Blitz, or bombing of London and other cities. London did not break under the Blitz, and the bombing only strengthened British resolve to turn back the enemy. Now they started attacking population centers and civilians. So this was a big problem during this time. What most of the people living in these major cities did is they went and they stayed down in the subway tunnels. They were easily fortified against a lot of attack, and lots of people could fit down there at all times. So it was easy to stop the trains and send people down to the tunnels. The Axis strategy during the war. So remember, the Axis is Germany, Italy, and Japan. So again, they kept using those U-boats. The Germans hoped to defeat the Soviet Union quickly and gain control of the Soviet oil fields, which would help them get more oil. And it would also force Britain out of the war through a bombing campaign and submarine warfare. Think back to World War I. This should be very, very familiar. Before America's industrial and military strength could turn the tide. So the Germans absolutely did not want America to get involved. They're like, let's just keep this to Britain and maybe the Soviet Union right now. We don't want other people to get involved. Allied strategies. So America and its allies, Britain and the Soviet Union, after being invaded by Germany, followed a defeat Hitler first strategy. So basically just beat Hitler before Hitler can beat us. Most American military resources were targeted for Europe. The Allied leaders were Chiang Kai-shek from China, Franklin Roosevelt from the US, Winston Churchill from Great Britain. They all got together in Cairo, Egypt on November 22nd, 1943, which is when that picture was taken. The war going on in Europe. Despite strong isolationist sentiment at home, the U.S. increasingly helped Britain. We gave Britain war supplies and old naval bases in Bermuda and the Caribbean, known as the Lend-Lease Act. So we were giving them these things to help the war effort, but we said we were still saying isolationist by saying, oh, we're just letting them borrow it. We're not actually giving it to them. Franklin Roosevelt compared it to lending a garden hose to a next-door neighbor whose house was on fire. It does very little to help the true war effort, but it still helps them a little bit. So growing American involvement. When the war began in 1939, the U.S. decided to declare its neutrality. We're not getting involved. Japan then advanced into French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies. To stop the Japanese aggression, the U.S. banned the sale of war materials to Japan. So we said no more sale to Japan. The tensions then rose between Japan and the U.S. While negotiating, Japan decided to attack Pearl Harbor, and that became a date which will live in infamy, December 7th, 1941. The U.S. then declared war on Japan on December 8th, 1941. Germany and Italy, as Japan's allies, said, okay, we're going to declare war on the U.S. now. So the war in Asia. After Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, Hitler honored a pact with Japan and declared war on the U.S. The debates over isolationism in the U.S. were now over. We were officially involved. So it was now a true world war, and everybody was involved. So these are now the causes and the major players. Next time we will get into the major battles and conflicts of the war.